Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by OraSure Technologies. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Oral fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster results, cost savings with minimal risk of tampering and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The Intercept Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. It was ranked as the #1 recognized brand name in oral fluid testing in the 2014 National Drug Testing Industry Survey. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Today's presentation is entitled The Latest Trends in Drug Test Cheating and How to Stop It, and will be presented by Bill Current. Bill Current is the president and founding partner of the Current Consulting Group and the publisher of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com. He is the author of 10 books on substance abuse-related issues, including the popular title, Why Drug Testing? CCG is a leading provider of drug testing policy writing services, working with companies to help them optimize their drug testing ROI. Bill is the former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education and vice president of consulting for Employee Information Services. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica, and welcome to everyone who's on today's webinar. I'd first like to start by just, again, acknowledging OraSure Technologies for hosting this monthly webinar series. In fact, some months they host more than one webinar, and so they're doing a great job bringing information to the industry and to the markets on drug testing, and it's a great resource and a valuable service that they provide. So, again, I want to thank OraSure for providing this type of an outlet for information. This is just the overview of today's webinar presentation, just in case I sort of get lost and twisted along the way as we go through today's webinar. We're going to talk about drug test cheating, some of the latest trends in drug test cheating, some of the things that maybe you're seeing will sound familiar from today's presentation. Maybe you'll learn some new stuff that's going on that might be valuable to you as either a drug testing provider or as a buyer or user of drug testing services. In preparation for today's presentation, we here at the Current Consulting Group did a survey. We sent out a survey to subscribers to our state law service at statedrugtestinglaws.com, and we got a lot of great responses back. We're going to share some of that information as part of today's webinar, so it doesn't exist in any other form anywhere else. And we also asked our subscribers to share some of their experiences. What are some of the latest things that they're seeing? What are some of the crazy examples of drug test cheating that they've become aware of? So we've got these sort of interspersed throughout today's presentation. So at various points, I'm going to pause and share some statistics. I'm going to share some quotes and some stories with you. And hopefully, in the end, you'll find the information to be very valuable. In fact, let's just start with one right now. This is a story from the field that was submitted by one of our subscribers. This was an individual. She was telling the story of an individual who was taking an instant test. So this was a point-of-collection testing device, one of those instant cups that gives you an instant result. The individual entered the bathroom, found that there was no bluing agent in the toilet bowl, so the water was clear. So once he did that, he dipped the cup into the bowl, into the toilet bowl. Once all the lines showed negative, he poured the water out and then urinated in the cup, producing a negative specimen with a correct temperature for his unsuspecting employer. How many of you have had that happen or have suspected something like that? Again, we're going to talk about some of the precautions that you can take to prevent cheating in the collection site or wherever the collecting of the urine specimen is taking place. But putting some type of blue dye in the toilet water is sort of drug testing 101. If you're in the drug testing business, you're in the collection business, that's something that you automatically do. It's just one of the the number one things that you do. Okay, that's our first story from the field. We're going to talk about the magnitude of the problem, both the problem of drug abuse and the problem of drug test cheating. And so I'm going to share some statistics with you to sort of get us all on the same page together. And the first thing I want to do is throw a number out at you, 24,600,000. What do you think that number is? Well, I'm going to tell you. It's the number of people in the United States, 12 and older, who admit to using an illicit drug at least once in the 30 days prior to being interviewed as part of the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. This is a survey that comes out every year from the federal government. It is the best indicator of drug use trends that we have in the United States. It goes clear back to the 1970s when it was called the National Household Survey on Drug Abuse. Of the 22.4 million of that bigger number, the 24.6, who are current illicit drug users 18 or older. So of the adults who admit to being current illicit drug users, nearly 70%, 68.9%, were employed either full or part-time. So that really dispels some of the myths about drug abusers. They're not, homeless vagabonds in many cases. Lots of them, a big majority of them, are employed full or part-time. And as you see in that last bullet, among adults 18 and older who were unemployed, 18.2% of those individuals were current drug users. So it's likely. 70%, that second bullet there, about 70%, that means that there's about, if you do the math, there's about somewhere around 1 in every 6 employees in the workplace has a substance abuse problem, about 15%. And then you add 18% of the unemployed, you can see the motivation that you could have as an employer or in other settings, treatment, schools, criminal justice, et cetera, where sometimes in certain markets for drug testing, like criminal justice, like treatment, of course, the percent of positives is going to be higher from drug testing than it will be in other areas. But there's a lot of drug abusers out there, and these are just the ones we know about. The federal government did a study on this survey to determine how accurate these numbers are from year to year, and they determined that they're about 1/3 lower than what they probably really are. So that means that estimated 24.6 million there at the top is probably closer to 32 or 33 million, okay? So a lot of people using drugs and a lot of people subject to drug testing. These are the drugs that they're using, and this is no surprise, of course, that marijuana is at the top of the list. But look at that second category, prescription drugs. These are the oxycodones, the hydrocodones, the other prescription narcotics and tranquilizers and sedatives and whatnot that individuals either obtain legally or through illegal means. And put together in one category, it's the number 2 category of drug abuse in the United States. For many, many years, as I've tracked this issue over my 25-year career, cocaine was always number 2. But over the last several years, this category of psychotherapeutic drugs has leaped over cocaine into the number 2 spot by quite a margin, actually. Not close to marijuana yet, but by quite a margin. And the only reason I point that out is because people who use marijuana will cheat on a drug test, and people who use oxycodone will cheat on a drug test. And there are a lot more oxycodone users out there than there are cocaine users and people who are using heroin, although heroin use is on the rise, and that's a growing concern in the United States right now. But when it comes to drug testing, you got to make sure you're testing for the drugs that people are using. So, one, you want to be concerned about drug test cheating and doing everything you can to thwart those efforts. But at the same time, you want to make sure you're testing for the drugs that people are using, or else you're really just fooling yourself. You don't really have a drug-free workplace or, whatever the organization is that you're representing. Now, we did a little bit of research on this a few years back as a company when we were known as WFC and Associates. That's why I left the name on there. Now we're, of course, the Current Consulting Group. But we estimated that there were approximately 50 million samples being tested annually, generating $1.7 billion in revenue just in the United States. Now, the global market for drug testing is really taking off right now. We do an annual survey of the drug testing industry, and this will be our 17th year of that survey. But we also, for the last 2 years, this being our 3rd year, have been doing an international drug testing survey as well. And the $1.7 billion of revenue generated in the United States is right just ahead of the total number generated outside the United States. It's a growing market for drug testing, and it's coming from treatment, it's coming from criminal justice, law enforcement, roadside testing. Of course, the workplace is still the major market for drug testing. Government entities, schools, student testing, etc. All of them, these are all organizations or elements of society that have embraced drug testing. And when you combine all of their numbers, that's how you get to the 50 million and the $1.7 billion. There's traditional lab-based urine testing going on, but there are a lot of alternative testing methods today. Lab-based oral fluid testing, instant result urine testing, hair testing. All of these are starting to make it more possible for people in different areas, professional areas, to consider doing drug testing, because it's a much more friendly process to the administrator of the drug test. And the reason why there's so much drug testing going on is because of all the different things that we have tried to sort of curb the growth of drug abuse in the United States and throughout the world. The one thing that has really worked is drug testing. It has proven to be a powerful deterrent to drug use and a very effective way to identify people who need help. There's a lot at stake, whether you're a business, a criminal justice organization, a school, a treatment center, etc. There's a lot at stake. And so drug testing is one of the ways that you can address a very serious problem and have a very significant impact on that problem in a very positive way. But you have to realize, and this was a quote that came out of our survey of our subscribers, that when the higher the stakes, the greater the motivation to cheat. So the drug users are highly motivated also. There's a lot at stake for them. If you're talking about an employee, what's at stake for them? Their job, and possibly not being able to get another job. And so the motivation to cheat on a drug test is significantly high if you're a person who's regularly high on drugs. And so that's why you see this ongoing effort to try to get around the test in some significant way. Now here's another number, 70%. This is the number, when you add it all up, of drug testing professionals, again, this is from our survey, who believe that the percentage of drug test samples that have been cheated on, adulterated, switched, etc., is 5% or higher, as much as 5% or higher. As you can see, 30% of the respondents to the survey thought that 1 to 2% of the samples were cheated on. 36.6% thought it was as much as 5%, 20% as much as 10%, and 13.3% said that they thought it was more than 10%. You add up those three lines there, as much as 5%, as much as 10%, or more than 10%, and you've got 70% of the drug testing profession indicating that they think that more than 5% of drug test samples are being adulterated, diluted, switched, some other cheating method has been taking place, and that sample's been compromised. That's a significant increase. Years ago, when we first started doing our industry surveys, we asked the question, what percentage of drug test samples are adulterated or switched or cheated on? And generally, at a very high percentage year after year, it would be somewhere between 1% and 2%. When you talk to professionals today, especially depending on the market that you're in or the type of industry within the workplace market that you're in, the suspicion of drug test cheating is much higher, and sometimes there's proof that the drug test cheating has taken place. And we're going to share some of that with you right here. These are some comments that actually came right out of the survey. So they detect about 1%, but there are some that are diluted that are not caught, or individuals who use fake urine to pass the test. With that, the percentage that goes up to 5% as an estimate. Historically, our clinic has worked with substance abuse, parole, family, and social service programs, so the percentage is higher than other markets for drug testing. The majority of our pre-employment donors are blue collars, such as Walmart or construction workers, so we tend to have a higher rate of attempted cheating. And that bold statement there, most of these are non-federal tests. So in other words, if you're in the workplace market, you know that DOT-mandated drug tests, for example, are going to have a lower rate of drug test efforts or attempts versus non-mandated. And part of the reason for that is that in the non-mandated arena for the workplace, it's kind of up to you in many respects what you're going to do or what you're going to do for your client to try to combat these cheating efforts. But under the DOT regulations, there are things that you must do. And I've got some slides coming up later in today's presentation on that. I like this last bullet, though. Quote, We pride ourselves on busting cheaters, and we've actually started tracking this in our clinic. We only began in December, but we had 39 cheaters in December out of approximately 800 collections. I think the overall number will probably be approximately 8%. That's a lot. I mean, consider how much it costs to do a drug test and how much cost is involved in redoing a test or defending a corporate decision to terminate somebody based on a dilute specimen or some other cheated on specimen. 8% is a lot, depending on the number of drug tests you do. But if you look at it as an industry overall, 50 million drug tests, and somewhere between 8, 10, or maybe more than 10% are cheated on in some way or another. And of course, we're talking about traditional urine testing almost always when we're talking about cheating, because it's more vulnerable to cheating efforts. That's a lot of cost. That's a lot of time. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of effort to try to overcome it. Now, when it comes to cheating, I like to call this the axis of cheating. There are 3 primary methods of cheating, and within each of these 3, there are all kinds of different subcategories. Okay, we'll talk about some of it, and we're going to share some comments from our survey participants as well. But there's dilution, substitution, and adulteration. And let's pause and go through a couple more stories from the field here. Some of my favorites I've underlined here. And these are all quotes. My favorite is still the specimen that came in from an aircraft carrier, and it was actually JP5. That's jet fuel. So the person didn't even bother to put real urine in the cup. They just put jet fuel in the cup. A driver who submitted a specimen that was too hot to handle, he then tried to bribe the collector to accept the specimen. Wonderful. And then here's one of my favorites, the 4th bullet, the last one there. Male donor had an out-of-temperature specimen. His pregnant girlfriend went outside, hid between 2 cars in the parking lot, and squatted. When we did not allow her to re-enter the building, she, quote-unquote, went into labor, so he would have to leave. The employer did not allow that individual to retake the test. There's one that I've never heard of, though, taking your pregnant girlfriend with you to go into fake labor so you could get out of taking the test. All right, so we talked about the fact that there's the dilution method, the substitution method, the adulteration method, and lots of products that are out there on the market that you can use, you can purchase, a lot of advice, homemade remedies, things of that nature. The dilution method requires the user, the donor, let's say, to consume large amounts of liquid prior to the test. Now, this is usually going to be water. It can be other liquids, but it's usually water, and sometimes the water will have some type of an adulterant added to it or mixed in, often followed by more consumption of water. Now, this is all in an effort to dilute the drug concentration or the concentration of the drug in that urine sample. Okay, so the water diluted urine sample doesn't necessarily mean that the person is a drug user, okay? But the specimen will typically be reported by the laboratory back to the employer as being unfit for testing. Now, there are some rapid result devices on the market that have built-in validity strips that will right there on the spot tell you whether there's something wrong with that specimen. But if you're using a device, an instant testing device that doesn't have one of those strips on it, then you can either use one of these standalone add-on adulteration strips, might be a dipstick device, or you can send the specimen into the laboratory if you feel like or you suspect that something's wrong with it. But the idea here is that something's added to the specimen to try to dilute the concentration of the drug that's in the urine specimen. Now, I went online just yesterday to get some of the latest stuff that's out there, and I found this. Now, this is precious. Now, again, and let me just say, I should have said this at the very outset. I realize that some of these stories are funny. They're embarrassing for the people that were involved in them, and I don't mean to make fun of anybody. The fact of the matter is there are a lot of people out there who have such a bad problem with drugs that their best hope is to somehow cheat on the test and get away with it because they can't stop using. So I don't mean to make fun of them. But I do want to make fun of this website because we're talking about giving advice to somebody who is a drug abuser who is so determined to continue using illicit drugs that he or she cannot stop long enough to pass a drug test. And so they're looking for any type of advice to get them through the drug test they know that's coming up. So I found this one precious because suddenly they're concerned, the advice giver here is concerned about the drug user's health. Be careful not to overhydrate. Although rare, it is possible to drink too much water and damage your internal organs, enough so to become fatal. Well, drugs are fatal. Drugs can damage your internal organs, but there's no caution about that on the website. Just, you got to drink a lot of water, but be careful not to overhydrate. And then they advise the donor to eat healthy foods. Your body will need all the nutrients it can get. Eat plenty of fruits, vegetables, legumes, lean proteins the week before your drug test. And then exercise every day. Sounds like we're trying to lose weight here, right? Or, build up as much of a sweat as possible, since sweating is a way to detox your body. The kidneys and bladders can only filter so much in such a time. Sweating helps the body excrete waste through your pores as well as your bladder. Well, that's very thoughtful. No advice to stop using drugs. See a counselor or treatment center. Just be careful not to overdrink. Eat good, healthy foods, and exercise. Now, let's switch gears and go to the substitution method. The substitution method is quite obviously what it sounds like. You're substituting someone else's urine or something else's urine for yours. So your urine's dirty. You're not going to pass the drug test. So you desperately reach out to somebody else to get a sample of their urine. And sometimes you may go online and buy what you think is clean urine and clean human urine. But there's lots of different complications, right? Because in the substitution method, you're trying to smuggle this clean urine into the bathroom stall where you're at, and all kinds of things can go wrong there, right? The vial that you're containing the substitute urine in could break, it could leak. You might be actually putting pig or horse or dog urine into the vial for all you know. And that good friend of yours who was so generous in loaning you some of his urine, probably loan's not the right word, he probably wasn't looking to get it back, could himself be a drug user. And as I'm going to show you, there's some more precious advice coming up on that. But that third bullet here really grabs me every time. Some people have even resorted to injecting someone else's urine directly into their bladder or using the urine of an animal. And of course, that begs the question, wouldn't it be easier to just stop using drugs? But again, some people are so desperate, and in some cases so stupid, as to literally inject someone else's urine directly into their bladder. That one takes the cake. Okay. Now, this is from another website offering advice on how to do the substitution method, how to conceal your containers so that it won't be noticed. The advice here is be sure you can quietly open the container as the lab personnel may be just outside the door listening, okay? If you're required to change into a gown, maybe you've gone for a physical and there's a drug test included in it, the advice is, if so, a condom holding the samples and taped around the thigh can be concealed under the gown. That, of course, has lots and lots of obvious complications. You can also run a plastic line from a flexible container and tape it to your urination equipment to be gender neutral, and even urinate under supervision by doing that. But be sure to keep the sample between 91 and 97 degrees. It's almost like, your favorite uncle is giving you some good life advice here. Athletes have been known to substitute urine and inject substituted urine directly into their bladder to try to pass a steroid test. And there's also the catheterization method. The website here says it's less painful, it's safer, and it's more effective. And, if you're watching cable television late at night, there are all those catheterization or catheter commercials on, so you could probably just order one from one of those 800 lines that you see on TV late at night on the cable channels. Now, don't always ask your urine donor. Here's where the good advice comes. Hopefully a friend you can trust what drugs they've taken in the last month. So let's just admit it. I'm a drug user, and all my friends are probably drug users, or a lot of them as well, right? I mean, that's what you're running into if you're a drug user. You hang around with other drug users. So hopefully you've got a good friend you can trust, but make sure you ask him or her which drugs they've been using so that if you're asked, you can actually give a list of the drugs that you've taken, presumably prescription drugs. Now be careful though, if the urine ages beyond 18 hours, this substituted urine, deterioration becomes noticeable and the lab will likely suspect tampering. All good advice. Powdered urine. You can buy powdered urine online, mix it with hot water, and you've got a clean sample. Or, as this website says, you can make your own powdered urine. Urinate into a glass container, let it evaporate, and then scrape the inside of the concentrate. Just mix it with water before the test, and the sample will have the correct specific gravity, pH, color, etc. And then if all of that fails, Dr. Grow, that's a product, a brand name on the internet, has suggested that canine urine can be substituted safely to pass a drug test. Lots of helpful, friendly, fatherly advice out there on the internet. Now, the other method is the adulteration or the additive method, and that's when you're adulterating the sample by adding something into it, typically, after the specimen has been voided. So, the traditional things that you hear about are like bleach, vinegar, juices, eye drops, dish soap, A lot of commercial products that are out there also that claim to be able to interfere with the testing process. They cost money, of course, and I've got some advice coming up on that here from one of the websites. The adulteration method, though, requires the donor to also smuggle that additive into the bathroom stall where they're voiding the sample. So there's some intrigue involved in that process as well. But here's the good advice. Don't waste your money on commercial products that disguise or clean urine. There's no evidence that these products work. On top of this, they're expensive, and many of the ingredients are simple diuretics, which can be purchased or made for far less cash. Isn't that something? So now they're concerned about your health. Make sure you exercise. Make sure you eat healthy foods, right? Don't overhydrate. And don't waste your money. Use your money on something more important to you, like drugs. It's pretty safe also to assume that the drug testing companies are trying just as fast to come up with ways to detect these substances, these substances that promise to be able to fake the presence or mask the presence of drugs, as manufacturers are coming up with ways to invent them. If you can, stay away from them. That's the advice there. It's good advice. Also, there's the don't use drugs advice as well, but I haven't run into that on any of these websites yet. When all else fails, that one really caught my eye when I came across this website. When all else fails, spike it. This is a last resort. You can try to spike the urinalysis with bleach, detergent, or blood. Blood is rumored to be capable of throwing off the results of a test simply in order to buy you more time, right? If you go down to the last bullet, last sentence, this may buy you enough time to take the test again at some later date when you're more prepared. Now, what you have to do is you have to have longer fingernails. You try hiding an amount of this bleached laundry detergent crystals underneath the nail, just as the illustration shows there. And then when it comes time to take the test, add the detergent crystals to your urine sample and be sure to mix well. Of course, you've got the long fingernail, right? So you can use the long fingernail to kind of mix the crystals into the urine sample. They've thought of everything. When all else fails, spike it just to buy yourself a little bit more time. Now, let's go to a couple of my favorite stories from the field. A specimen had noticeable debris floating in it. I confronted the donor, and he said he had a coworker void his potato chip bag. So he voided into or urinated into the potato chip bag that this individual used to smuggle his quote-unquote clean urine into the stall. I'd never heard that one before. Here's a good one. The joke was on me, the collector said, when a donor took a pint-sized Ziploc bag of marijuana out of his pocket to lock up in the box during the emptying of the pockets. So the individual, there for a drug test, took out a Ziploc bag of weed so that he could lock it in the box so that it would be safe when he went in to void a sample in the bathroom. The collector goes on to say, I considered it a refusal and made him leave without his stuff, only to be horrified when I realized some minutes later that I was now in possession of the drugs. I dialed 911 and asked for a uniformed officer to come pick it up. The entire 911 operator staff laughed like fools, thinking this was a prank call. I assured them it was not, and after much effort on my part, they finally sent an officer to pick it up. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. 27,300,000. take a second and try to imagine what that number represents. Have you ever gone on the internet and typed in pass a drug test, cheat on a drug test, getting past a drug test? Well, if you do, you're going to get 27,300,000 websites all offering advice or help on how to do that. Your enemy is your friend if you're in the drug testing business, or if you're an employer, you work in a treatment center, et cetera, a criminal justice office, or some sort of parole office, et cetera. Your enemy is your friend. Go online and research what's out there. You're going to come across all kinds of crazy, crazy things, but in the course of your professional life in the drug testing world, you're going to see a lot of these things happen, and you're going to be prepared when it does happen. You're going to be able to spot these cheating methods because you've researched the websites that offer the advice on how to cheat. And things are going to look familiar to you. They may have looked a little fishy to you to begin with, but you're going to be able to tell exactly where this is going because you've studied it, you've researched it, you recognize it when you see it right in front of you. So go on there, review the product offerings that are out there, and there's lots and lots of them. Read the claims that they make, okay, because some of them, to their credit, have some disclaimers in them. But really important, look at the frequently asked questions section. Most of these websites, some of the really good ones, like You're in Luck, they have an FAQ section. And if you read those, then you really sort of run into, or you come across, all the different challenges that these would-be drug test cheaters have encountered using the various advices or products that are offered on the internet. And so the FAQ section actually becomes one of your best sources of good, up-to-date information on drug test cheating. Now, some of these websites will have, very well-written, well-laid-out, well-organized sections step-by-step on how to cheat on a hair test, a urine test, even an oral fluid test, which is virtually impossible to cheat on. In fact, as I've gone through a lot of these websites, not all, not even a million of them, I find a lot of websites devoted to how to cheat on a urine test. And of course, urine testing is still the most common method of drug testing. I find some on hair testing, although hair testing is still very difficult to cheat on as well. And I've got one that I found on a website I think you're going to find very interesting coming up in a few slides. But very, very little out there on oral fluid testing. What I did find, though, I've captured onto a couple of slides, and I'm going to be sharing that with you in a second. Okay, what can you do to combat the problem besides doing your homework and being prepared? Well, there are precautions, there's validity testing, and there's putting consequences in place when people do try to cheat. Here's a few more stories from the field. And again, these slides are going to be available to you, so I'm not reading every one of them, but I do have a few favorites in here. The second bullet, a bottle of urine taped to his leg, detected during a medical prior to the drug test. When the physician asked him what it was, he looked at it and said, I don't know where that came from. I think that's a great, great response, right? You just got caught in the act, but your excuse is, I don't know where that came from. I don't know why that's taped to my leg. Here's another good one, the next bullet. We have an Easy Mart convenience store just 1 block away. The employees call us regularly when they catch someone heating urine in the microwave at the Easy Mart convenience store. That's a great one. And then finally, a 19-year-old male who was brought to the test facility by his mother set his pants on fire in the collection room with a marijuana pipe he was smoking before he came in to be tested. His mom was not amused, and we had to make her leave the office before she beat him senseless. I think he's senseless. He was probably senseless already, right? The donor insisted it wasn't his pipe, but I told him that once he set his underwear on fire, that made it his. I thought that was one of the best stories any of our people submitted. Once you set your underwear on fire, pal, that pipe became yours. And, of course, it was his to begin with. Now, as we get into these precautions, let me just take us through a quick science lesson. You've heard the term creatinine. You've heard specific gravity. What are those things? Well, creatinine is a waste product that's produced by the body, and it's found in urine. Now, a typical normal urine sample will have a creatinine level greater than or equal to 20. Okay, so anything, below that is a problem. Specific gravity is the urine density. And typically, a normal urine sample will have a specific gravity level of greater than or equal to 1.003. A dilute specimen will have a creatinine and specific gravity value that is lower than what would normally be found in the human urine. And a substituted specimen will typically have creatinine and specific gravity values that are either so diminished or so divergent, and I'm quoting here, that they are not consistent with a regular human urine sample. Okay? So these are terms that your laboratory, your MRO are going to use with you, creatinine, specific gravity in particular, and you just need to know the basics here. I'm not a scientist. I do understand the basics. It's good for you to understand the basics as well if the lab or the MRO comes back to you and starts talking in creatinine or specific gravity, okay? We're going to talk about the precautions, the validity testing, and the consequences as things that you can do to try to thwart drug test cheating efforts, okay? Now, the precautions may sound like they just apply to where the collection takes place, the off-site collection facility that you as an employer, for example, will be using. But it could be a collection that takes place at the workplace, at the criminal justice office, at a treatment center, et cetera, right? I mean, people are on the webinar today shaking their heads, yes, because you probably deal with this. You may be a professional that's dealing with it. You may be an employer that brings the collection in-house and you do it in your own workplace, your own facility, okay? So these are precautions that you need to be aware of. Ensure that the collection takes place in a secured area. Require the donor to wash his or her hands prior to voiding the sample. Remember, if all else fails, spike it. Well, we want to get that stuff out from underneath their fingernails. Add some type of colored dye, some bluing agent to the toilet water that's going to be used for the collections. That eliminates the possibility of somebody simply putting the water into the vial, making sure that the levels come up negative, emptying the water, and then urinating into the cup. Turn off all the running water or just the hot water during the collection process. Ask donors to leave outer clothing such as coats and jackets outside. To have those things just makes it too easy to smuggle things in, right? So when we talk about people smuggling something taped to their thigh, inside a gown, underneath their armpits, etc., we want to make it that hard for them, right? We're probably still going to catch them doing that if we know what to look for. I mean, really the best defense against drug test cheating is an educated, trained, prepared administrator of the drug test, the technician who actually does the test and is looking for that temperature reading every time, is looking for suspicious behavior, okay? Read the temperature on all samples immediately after voiding. Observe the voiding of the sample sometimes. Under the federal regulations, there are mandated direct observations under certain circumstances, and I've got those on a slide. I'm not going to walk you through all of it today, but you'll have it there if you want to refer to it at another time when you're going through these slides. And remember that there are certain testing methods like hair testing, very, very difficult, possible, but very difficult to cheat on, and oral fluid testing that doesn't really require the use of off-site collection facilities because you're not dealing with urine. So an oral fluid sample can be collected anywhere, anytime, and the donor and the administrator of the test are standing right in front of each other the entire time. There's no possibility for somebody to add something, substitute something, etc., with oral fluid testing. Those are all precautions that you can take to try to make the cheating effort as difficult as possible. Now, with validity testing, this can happen at the laboratory or it can happen on-site with some type of validity testing strip, either that's built into an instant test device or that you use after the voiding of the sample. But this is where you try to detect whether the specimen was diluted, adulterated, substituted in any way right there on the spot. Now, the lab can do that, of course, if you order that from your laboratory, and most laboratories will offer that service, or if you're doing instant testing where you're using the disposable single-use type of cups, you can order those cups with validity strips in them, or there are aftermarket strip devices that you can use as well, in addition to the POCT cup. And I have consequences as the third thing, but I'm going to talk about that in the policy section of today's presentation, so it's coming up. Which testing method is best? Well, there's three primary testing methods when it comes to drug testing: hair testing, oral fluid testing, and urine testing. Now, we've established that urine testing is particularly vulnerable and subject to drug test cheating. But we threw this question out to our statedrugtestinglaws.com subscribers in the survey that we did and asked them which test method is toughest to cheat on. 13.3% still said urine was toughest to cheat on. 30% said hair. 23.3% oral fluid. 46.6% said blood. And we did offer that option, so I guess that's, sort of my bad for doing that. But blood is a very uncommon drug test method in the workplace market. So a lot of you on today's call are maybe thinking that. But remember, if you're in treatment, if you're working in a hospital, other maybe legal or law enforcement type settings, taking a blood sample may be not common, but it may be more common than you would certainly find in a workplace setting. You're not going to do blood testing usually with school or student drug testing, but you might do it routinely with professional athlete testing. Urine, hair, oral fluid are much more common in the workplace market and very common in criminal justice as well, and in student drug testing and school drug testing situations. But this gives you sort of the idea of the perception of the difficulty of cheating in these various testing methods. And of course, 13.3% said urine. That's the lowest of the 4 methods on the screen right now, but probably still too high, really, when you think about it, because urine is not easy to cheat on. The labs are always very aggressively, the SAMHSA certified labs, the big names that are out there, they're always aggressively looking at what's going on. They're following the trends. They look at it scientifically, and they're always coming up with ways to detect the latest adulterants and things of that nature that would-be cheaters are using. But urine is still probably easily the most identified testing method to cheat on. Hair and oral fluid would be much more difficult to cheat on, and probably, even though oral fluid tested a little lower here, and not just because OraSure is our sponsor today, but really probably the toughest to cheat on. You can do observed collections, although, and that becomes something to at least to keep an eye on. But as you see in the second bullet there, one person said oral fluid testing is the toughest to cheat, and that's because oral fluid is always an observed collection. You never send somebody off to a private room to give a sample of their saliva. That's always done face-to-face between the administrator or the technician of the test and the donor. So it's always an observed collection, and there's no need to use a private bathroom stall because we're not collecting urine with oral fluid. Same is true with hair. Now, hair is a little bit more of a complicated collection process, but not complicated. A little bit more involved than with oral fluid, but not a complicated collection process. As this one person said at the bottom here, hair followed by oral fluid and then urine. And then they added, since I do not have any dealings with blood, I'm sure it would be difficult to adulterate as well. And of course it is. Now, a lot of people you'll hear in the scientific community will refer to oral fluid as a substitute for blood from a scientific standpoint. In other words, it mimics the testing process and the science of blood. And that's probably true to some extent when it comes to drug test cheating as well. It's just challenging to cheat on a blood test, challenging to cheat on an oral fluid test as well. Of the 3 primary cheating methods, dilution, substitution, and additive, which testing method is subject to those 3 different drug test cheating methods? Well, urine is vulnerable in all 3 areas: dilution, substitution, additive, or adulteration. Hair is really not so much dilution, not so much substitution, but there is an additive process that people claim works. I've not seen evidence of it, but you'll see that online. Oral fluid's not subject to dilution. Substitution, really not. I mean, you talk about injecting someone else's urine directly into your bladder. Could you put somebody else's saliva directly into your mouth? And I don't know. Even the thought of it, right? The very picture is not worth looking at. And then the additive method doesn't really work with oral fluid testing. It comes down to, what are you really looking for? So like with hair testing, for example, you're looking at the longest window of detection of the 3 major testing methods. A hair test will be able to show drugs in that hair sample for up to 90 days. Now, the window of detection doesn't start right away with hair. So the person uses drugs, and sometime in the next 5, 6, 7 days perhaps, it's not going to be detectable in their hair sample unless they're a chronic daily user. But from about that 5 to 7 day mark, the window of detection stays open at the typical cutoff levels that are used with hair testing for about 90 days. And so that's a great, sort of lifestyle indicator that you don't get with urine and with oral fluid. It's certainly less invasive to some people. Maybe if you're follically challenged, you might find it invasive, and I suppose some people do. But it's very difficult to cheat with using standard cheating methods. Here's some more stories from the field, and I'm running out of time quickly, so I'm going to leave some of these for you to read later. But these next two slides are really, very, very interesting. It's a way to cheat on a hair test from one particular website. You saturate your hair with vinegar. You let the vinegar sit for 15 to 20 minutes. Do not rinse it. That's the step number 3. Oh, and the person said they left the vinegar and acne treatment in the hair for 30 minutes. Do not rinse the vinegar and acid out of your hair. Pour the liquid detergent on your hair. Rub it in real good. Concentrate these products on more than the back of your head, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last line there, I scrub this into my scalp and hair. Let it sit for 20 to 30 minutes, and then rinse all the product out of your hair, but do not wash or condition the hair. And then step number 5, dye the hair. The box said 25 minutes. I left it in for about 40. Then rinse the dye. Use the little conditioner that comes in it. So, if you want to do that, I saw some great ones in here on ironing your hair, burning your hair. Again, it all begs the question, wouldn't it be easier to just simply, stop using drugs? And here's a little bit more on shampooing and hair testing. With oral fluid, again, you have to ask yourself, what are you looking for? So the window of detection with oral fluid is typically shorter, obviously, than with hair testing. That's the longest. A little bit shorter than with urine testing, but drugs are going to be detectable in that oral fluid sample almost immediately after the individual uses the drug. So the window of detection opens up immediately, which makes oral fluid testing a great recent use indicator. So like if you're looking at a post-accident test, a reasonable suspicion test, somebody comes back from their lunch break, they smell a pot, you want to do a test. If they were smoking pot in the parking lot on their lunch break, they're most likely going to test positive on that oral fluid sample. Whereas with urine, there's going to be a lag time of about an hour, thereabouts. And with hair testing, of course, it's a lag time of days. Every oral fluid collection is observed. It can be done on site, very easy to do. And for these reasons, it's virtually adulteration proof, which makes oral fluid different than urine testing when it comes to cheating. Lab-based oral fluid testing, as I say, very difficult to adulterate. You're still getting a lab-based result. You're getting the security of a lab-based result, but you're not dealing with the vulnerability of the collection process that's inherent with urine testing, because you've got the observed collection taking place 100% of the time, 100% of the time of the collection. So most of the typical cheating methods just simply don't work when it comes to oral fluid testing. And if you search the internet, you'll find all kinds of advice on how to cheat on a urine test, but very little on a saliva or an oral fluid test. I did find this, though, quote, try to avoid the test. I thought that was great. If one is being tested and is used in the past 3 days, you will need to overcome the saliva collection. To do this, you will have to avoid submitting saliva and perform the steps requested by your instructor. Okay, so just abstain from using drugs for 3 days, okay? Then, when instructed to place the collection pad between the lower cheek and gums and gently rub the pad back and forth along the gum line until the pad is moist, instead, you will fake this movement and rub the pad on your teeth. Again, wouldn't it be better? You're not going to get enough saliva on doing it that way, and so the collector, the technician's going to suspect something. But here's my favorite. As a general rule, the easiest way to pass the saliva test is to stop smoking pot for a day or two prior to taking the test. Be sure to brush your teeth thoroughly. I love the hygiene advice here, and use mouthwash daily to clean out the potential toxins. So that's one of the things you just find on a lot of these websites, a real genuine concern for the health and the finances and the hygiene of the drug abuser. So it's a lot of good life advice on these websites, as well as how to cheat on a drug test without necessarily not being a drug user. But if you're going to be subject to an oral fluid test, you do have to stop using drugs for a day or 2 or 3, because otherwise your test sample is going to come up positive. Cheaters love urine. We've already talked about that. All the efforts that you go through to try to combat the cheating on a urine sample adds time and cost and reduces the ROI of the drug test. But again, it comes down to what you're looking for. So you may like what you get out of urine testing. It may fit your company culture, your policy better than the other testing methods. You just need to know that urine testing is more susceptible to drug test cheating, And so you have to go through these extra efforts to make sure that you're making cheating as difficult as possible for that would-be cheater. Okay, oral fluid and hair, much, much harder to cheat on. And of course, this is really obvious, but I got this. This was a criminal justice office that switched to Department of Corrections, I should say, in Iowa, switched from urine testing to lab-based oral fluid testing. And as you can see in that first pie chart there, the blue section, that blue wedge there, is the percentage of dilute specimens. When they were doing urine testing, 5% of their specimens were dilute. When they switched to oral fluid, of course, that all went away because you're not going to be able to dilute an oral fluid sample. So they went from 5% to 0. Now, we just have a few minutes. Please submit your questions. If I don't get to your question before this presentation is over, I promise we will respond by email, or if you want to call, I'd be happy to walk you through your question and answer it for you. Addressing your drug test policy by making sure that your prohibited conduct addresses it, you're clear in the consequences, and as I've just talked about, the testing methods are clearly articulated in the policy. Sometimes that alone will scare the would-be cheater if they read your policy and they know what the consequences are going to be for cheating on a drug test. So you want to make sure that if somebody is caught cheating on a test, if their specimen is considered unfit for testing, if they do something else that makes the sample dilute, adulterated in some way, unfit for testing, has to be recollected, whatever your policy is going to be, that is addressed in the policy, and that a would-be cheater can see that in there and know that they're going to be treated the same as somebody who has tested positive. So your prohibited conduct mentions the various ways in which people cheat on a test, switching, tampering, adulterating, etc. These are prohibited under this policy, and the consequences are, quote, individuals who attempt to alter a drug or alcohol test result or a test sample by means of tampering with, adulterating, switching, or diluting a specimen will be treated as if they had a positive test result. And then in the consequences section of your policy, again, all of this within the parameters of what your applicable state laws will allow, right? Because that's the number one goal, is to comply with the state laws that apply to your company or to your organization. But in that consequences section, you're going to have the consequences for somebody who tests positive, for a first-time positive, and for subsequent positives. So when you say in the consequences section that somebody who attempts to cheat on a drug test will be treated as if they had a positive test result, you're also going to have right next to it the consequences for having a positive test result. And this will help to deter drug use among some people. Remember, drug testing is not simply to catch people, and that's not the objective, right? But we do have drug users on our payroll, right? Go back to those statistics at the top of the hour when we talked about 15% of the workforce having a substance abuse problem. Well, some people get past the pre-employment test and enter your payroll. They're on your payroll. You've got to take measures to prevent some of those people from cheating. And when you do, and when they understand what the consequences are, some of them will just stop using drugs. It just won't be worth the chance. Remember, we talked about, you know, if the risks are high enough, the consequences are there in place, people won't cheat. They just won't do it because it won't be worth the risk. Some people, they can't help it, and you know, God help them, of course. But under other circumstances, we're talking about people who do have a choice. And once they realize that their job is at risk, that's what they're risking by cheating on a drug test and continuing to use drugs in the first place, they're going to stop using drugs in many cases. The deterrent effect is that powerful. And today's presentation is not about random drug testing, but random testing has proven to be the most effective deterrent among the different drug testing methods. And that we have a whole presentation on that with a return on investment formula that we demonstrate, because random testing is really the way to go. Now, again, you have to comply with the state laws that apply to you in order to do random testing. Some states limit it to safety-sensitive workers, et cetera, et cetera. But where you're allowed to do it and under what circumstances you're allowed to do it, random testing is the most effective testing method, generally speaking, when it comes to deterrence. Okay? Pre-employment testing, great deterrent, but a lot of people will abstain from using drugs just long enough to pass that drug test to come onto your payroll, and they resume their drug use behaviors. Now, these next couple of slides deal with some of the federal regulations that you'll find in 49 CFR Part 40. I'm not going to take you through them all. If you're in that line of work, you know what they are, of course. But one of the things that was added not too many years ago was, an observed collection must take place when the reason for the test is a return to duty or follow-up test, or when there's suspicion or direct observation of an attempt to tamper with the specimen. So very direct to the sort of this high probability of a user, or when there's suspicion of actual drug test cheating going on. Then you're going to want to you're going to be required to observe the voiding of that urine sample. Now, we know that under 49 CFR Part 40, the only drug testing method that is permitted is lab-based urine testing. And so that's why you see a lot of stuff built into Part 40 that deals with adulteration, tampering, things of that nature. The federal government is in the process now of writing the first draft of regulations for lab-based oral fluid testing. And so as that comes out, hopefully we'll see something in the near future. But when those regulations come out for public comment, and I suspect they will come out in the near future, but it'll still be a long time into the future. Not long time's a relative term, but a year or so into the future before those regulations are ever finalized. But once they are out, and once they are finalized, and you have lab-based oral fluid testing in those regulations, it'll be interesting to see what the drug test sort of cheating language is as it relates to urine testing versus oral fluid testing. But I think we're going to see that coming out in the very near future. Well, we're coming in for a soft landing here. The conclusion section of today's presentation is sort of the stuff that hopefully you've gathered by listening to today's webinar. We know the drug problem is still there. It's not going away. Those numbers that I showed you at the very beginning, they're higher than last year's report from the federal government, so we know the problem is getting worse. This is not a presentation on the legalization of marijuana. We've got one on that if you're interested in ever hearing that one, but we will share with you some interesting statistics which shows that the percentage of positive drug test results in Colorado and Washington has increased significantly since those two states legalized marijuana for recreational use. So those who argue that the legalization of marijuana will not necessarily result in increased usage of the drug, I don't know if these positives prove that there's increased usage, but it at least proves that you're going to have more positive test results for workplace drug testing anyway. Drug testing is a powerful way to address the problem. Drug test cheating is common. There are a lot of websites out there, millions of them, that will offer advice and products that you can purchase to help a would-be cheater get past that drug test process. A lot of things that you can do, though. There are a lot of precautions that you can take. Validity testing, you can switch to oral fluid or hair testing where the possibility of cheating is much more challenging for the would-be cheater. Again, depending on what you want to get out of testing, why you test will determine how you test, when you test, and who you test. So if drug test cheating is a concern, if you're in one of these industries or occupations, or you're testing in a treatment center or in some type of criminal justice setting, then you know that the possibility of cheating is much higher than, say, in the workplace or in schools or in some other setting for drug testing. And so drug test cheating is a daily concern, something that you spend a lot of time concerned about and trying to make more difficult for the would-be cheaters. But depending on why you test and whether drug test cheating is a concern to you may determine how you test. And so some of these advanced alternative testing methods that are available out there may be worth considering. Of course, today's sponsor has been OraSure Technologies, and if you're interested, they can help you with some advice on that. I do have just a couple of minutes. I see that I'm just about out of time, but let me try to address a couple of questions real quickly. One question is, are there state drug testing laws that prohibit drug test cheating or create consequences for drug test cheating? And the answer to that is yes. There are some states that have passed laws, Texas being a very prominent example, that have passed laws that make it a crime to actually cheat on a drug test, or to sell a product that would help a person cheat on a drug test, or to assist another person in cheating on a drug test. It's a form of fraud, especially when you're substituting somebody else's or something else's urine for your own. And so there are some states, not a lot yet, but there are a handful of states that have passed laws that make drug test cheating a crime. And we'd be happy to share that list with you if you want to contact us if that's something that you're interested in having. And with that, I apologize, I'm out of time. We do have a lot more questions, so we will address them. We'll send that out to you. And if you have any other questions, please let us know. In conclusion, I'd like to again thank today's sponsor, OraSure Technologies, for hosting today's webinar. And with that, I will turn the microphone back over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Bill. And on behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope that you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.